Hi everybody, welcome back to Mando Lessons. My name is Baron Collins Hill. So glad to have you here. Today we are talking about these guys. We're talking about capos, whether you should use them, whether you shouldn't, all those different ideas. Capos are kind of a contentious issue in the mandolin world. I'm going to go over my thoughts on it, my understanding of sort of why some people might feel strongly about capos, and talk a little bit about whether a capo could be right for you. So if you're not familiar with a capo, all it does is it goes over the strings and say the 4th fret on the mandolin, and then I play what I know is a G chord, and I get a B major chord. So it's just changing, it's transposing the instrument. So I can use all of my familiar shapes and get some different keys. Now this is not a capo that I would actually recommend for a mandolin. That's just a guitar capo that's going to show up well on camera, but you can also get little mandolin and banjo sized capos that are going to be much better use for this kind of instrument. So capos help you play in different keys, but I think a lot of the sort of negative conversation around capos on the mandolin often come from people in the bluegrass world. And that makes sense because traditionally, mandolinists don't use capos to play in different keys on a mandolin because they have access to these handy chop chords, and once you get those chop chords underneath your fingers, it's really a mainstay in the sound of bluegrass to have that offbeat chop chord coming out of the mandolin while the bass is hitting the downbeat and we're on the offbeat. It's kind of part and parcel to bluegrass in general, and it really is a very different sound than if you're playing your kind of classic open strumming chords. It doesn't quite have that same sound. In general, I think if people are playing bluegrass and striving towards becoming a competent bluegrass mandolin player, I don't think you need a capo, and I think you should focus on learning to play in different keys and close positions and those chop chords, all that sort of thing. But I also love capos, so let's talk about why. The main thing that I love about a capo is just that it gives you a different sound on the instrument. You know, if I'm just playing along in my nice G, C, and D, has a nice sound to it, and I think every key sort of has its own sound. So we're gonna do those exact same shapes. I'm just gonna put the capo on the 3rd fret, so my G chord becomes a B flat. And I play those same chords, shapes, and it's gonna come out with a much kind of higher pitched, twinklier sound, a little bit brighter. And so that sort of just the tonal difference of capoing up, even if you're not worried about what key you're playing in, maybe you're just playing for yourself, or maybe you are matching where your voice comfortably sits, that's a great time to consider using a capo. Maybe if you have your G, C, and D chords down, but you actually sing better at a higher pitch, great opportunity to use a capo and still get that nice open chord sound where all those open strings can ring out as you move between the chords. It's a great sound. It's a very smooth, beautiful sound, and it's just also just a different sound from if I were to use, that's the same chord shapes and voicings just without the capo, but you can't have all those open strings ringing because your hand has to move around and fret. You can approximate it, but it's never going to be as open and ringing as having that capo there and having access to those open strings. While in a perfect world, we'd all just learn to play in all 12 keys with every chord voicing and know every scale and all of that sort of stuff, it's a lot of work, and I think having a goal in mind can really help you narrow down and figure out what it is you should be working on. For example, if you want to play traditional bluegrass, work on those chop chords, get those kind of closed positions down, work on how to take a break in a song in a bluegrassy style. Don't worry about a capo because you're probably not gonna need it. But if you're maybe more of a singer-songwriter or just want to sing some songs that in a key that matches your voice and be able to use all those nice open strings, you don't need to know every chord in the book, and you still, maybe you've got G, C, and D down and you want to sing in B flat, but you don't want to have to learn to play in a different key, that's a great time for a capo. And also, even if you do play, as I just demonstrated, you know how to play in B flat, it's just a different sound. So figuring out what the sound is that you're after is a great way to figure out, do I need to use a capo or not? If nothing else, they're just kind of fun to play around with. I often will just put a capo on somewhere random on the instrument. Let's go 6th fret. I don't know if the capo will actually capo that high, but we'll give it a try. Sometimes it's a little buzzy, but gotta take your chances and see if you can get it to ring out clearly and adjust the capo a little bit. But, you know, just playing stuff that's familiar under my fingers with a capo, this is like a piccolo mandolin now almost. It's an octave and a half step, I guess, if it's on the 6th fret above a mandola. So it's really high-pitched mandolin, it's very twinkly, it's just a great sound. Get all that nice ringing open strings without having to use a finger to keep those strings ringing, and really get a sound that you just can't get without using a capo. Now, if you're using a capo, you do need to be able to communicate with the other musicians you're playing with. So if you're playing with someone else, you can't just start moving the capo around willy-nilly because people are going to get confused, especially if you're playing fiddle tunes. Fiddle tunes are played in particular keys, so you can't just say like, oh, let's do Arkansas Traveler, but let's do it in E flat instead of D, because while that might sound great if you're on your own practicing, it gets that nice bright sound, different tonal palette that I was just talking about. You can't do that on the fly with a bunch of other musicians because fiddle players, for example, don't capo. Banjos might need to change their tuning, but if you're able to communicate in like a small band setting and say like, hey, let's all capo up, and maybe like the fiddle player is well-versed in playing in E flat, by all means, you can have that conversation about what key to play something in. But in general, in more community sessions, larger groups, really not using the capo because that's gonna confuse people, especially melody players. So hopefully that gave you some food for thought about capos. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.